G'day, I'm Owen, you've joined the pub test, and in this one we are continuing our Jack the Ripper suspect series, and we're covering a relative of someone that we've looked at before. Yes, James Maybrick is very well known as a Jack the Ripper suspect because of the Maybrick Diary. But could his brother, Michael Maybrick, have committed the crimes instead? Well, let's put it to the pub test. And Michael was born on the 31st of January 1841. Yes, he was from Liverpool, so that's a long way from London. He had 7 other siblings and he was pretty well much in the middle of them. His father was an engraver, but both Michael's father and grandfather were involved in music. And from a very early age, it was shown that Michael excelled at the piano. So his godfather pushed him into, well, I wouldn't say pushed as such, but encouraged him along to learn music, and he became very successful. He wrote under the pen name Stephen Adams when he was composing music and songs, and he got a lot of success, money as well, from some what I would call gospel songs. But he also wrote sea shanties, and one in particular is of note. It is called They All Love Jack. Interesting little song you might sing out on the high seas, I suppose. But I think that's where the writer Bruce Robinson took the name of his book, which highlights Michael Maybrick as Jack the Ripper from that, because his book is entitled They All Love Jack. Now, throughout his life, some people considered him to be the most upstanding, charming individual you could meet, and apparently he was quite a good-looking unit as well. But other people thought he was a bit arrogant and a bit of a bully. Now, those perceptions are important as we go through this particular discussion. Now, in 1893, he married his housekeeper. He apparently had been single all throughout his life. So he's early 50s now. His housekeeper was in her 40s, or maybe only 40, but regardless, they got married and he effectively retired to the Isle of Wight, was very involved in community activities, including being the mayor on 5 occasions, served as a magistrate and had something to do with the local hospital as well. But then in 1913, on the Isle of Wight, he passed away from heart failure. And so while that is interesting, we may wonder, how does this bloke, Michael Maybrick, fit into the Jack the Ripper saga? Well, Bruce Robinson, the writer, put forth this suspect, Michael Maybrick, in his book, as mentioned before, They All Love Jack. Now, in an interview, he referred to a Chinese proverb and said how he went about coming up with this particular suspect. And the Chinese proverb goes along the lines of that when a finger points to the moon, the imbecile looks at the finger. And what I understand from that Chinese proverb, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that some people fail to see the bigger picture, that they get bogged down in the little details. His next statement, hopefully none of you find overly offensive, but he said the following. He said, I thought ripperologists were always looking at the finger. I wanted to look at the moon. I don't know if he's calling ripperologists imbeciles. I really don't. I hope not. I don't know the bloke, never spoken to him. If you are out there, Bruce, just, get in touch. We can sort something out, and maybe send your literary agent details over to me too, and we can definitely have a really good conversation there. But moving on. The thing is, I think he's saying when he took a step back, rather than getting bogged down in minor detail, he saw clearly who Jack the Ripper was. And that was Michael Maybrick. But now why? Well, there's one really intriguing piece of evidence that he points to, and myself, I found this really fascinating. And not knowing much about the Freemasons or any of their mythology, it was a little bit eye-opening. And it all comes to do with the writing on the wall in Goulston Street, where part of Catherine Eddowes' apron was found, and nearby there, that particular phrase was plastered up. Now, that phrase, we don't exactly know what it said. because Sir Charles Warren made sure that it was removed before they could even get a photograph. Now, he said because he didn't want racial tension. Because what is known is that the word "the Jews" was written up there. Now, the policeman who first saw that had written down the JEWS, as we would refer to people from Israel now as Jews. But it was spelt different on the wall. And the coroner, when he was asking the question of that police officer, said, "Why did you write down that particular wording when that's not what everyone else saw?" But the way it was actually written on the wall was JUWES. And that is interesting. Why? Now, the story around this comes from Freemason mythology. I say mythology, I don't know if it's considered to be actual events, but I do believe it is in their stories. But I'm not a Freemason, so I don't know. If you want to share some of those secrets, then throw that down in comments. No one else will know. But what it said is there was a builder, Hiram, or should you say architect, and he was the designer of the temple, King Solomon's temple from the Bible. Now, 3 so-called ruffians who were also architects but wanted to know Hiram's secrets, he refused, and pretty well much they did away with him. But when Solomon found out, he ordered these 3 people to be executed. Now, the names of these 3 people were Jubilo, and Jubilam. Collectively, they were known as the Jews. JUWES, exactly as it was written on the wall. But, and this is a little bit heavy, so viewer discretion is advised, the way they were to be executed is of note. So they would all have their throats cut. One was severed in 2. Another had parts of his insides burnt, and also some of the entrails thrown over his body. Those descriptions line up very well with the Annie Chapman crime, the Whitehall mystery with the body found inside the Scotland Yard building, and Mary Kelly, where possibly some of her inside parts were burnt in the fire. Now, why was this connection with the writing and spelling of the name Jews not made back then? Well, interestingly, Sir Charles Warren himself was a high-level Freemason, as were many people in government and in high positions in royalty and so forth, or at least so it is claimed. And so they would not have wanted any connection made between these crimes and the Freemason movement. And that would explain very easily why Sir Charles Warren was insistent they remove that writing off the wall as quick as possible before someone could get a photograph. Even though other officers were saying, wait, this could be really important evidence, even if we get the handwriting and really analyse it. But he did not want that to take place. And interestingly as well, Sir Charles Warren himself made sure that there was no connection with the Jack the Ripper crimes to the Whitehall mystery event, where that body was found inside the box in the being built Scotland Yard building. He said that's got nothing to do with Jack the Ripper, even though the connection again could be made through the Jews and the way that crime was committed. And what also is of interest here is many of the letters that were sent in went to Sir Charles Warren. And it said that some of those letters, the handwriting matched the writing on the wall. And we are going to talk about those letters a little bit more. But many of these letters were just discounted because they were coming in from all over the country, in all different places, not the London area, certainly not Whitechapel, so therefore they must be hoaxes. Yet it's pointed out that Michael Maybrick, the musician, was on tour all around the country at the time. And he travelled quite extensively and quickly between events. But how Michael Maybrick came onto the radar of this writer is interesting. And I believe he said it was when he saw the Maybrick Diary, which apparently was written by James Maybrick. And you see, he'd known of, so Bruce Robinson knew of the Florence Maybrick case, which is a fascinating story in itself and received quite a lot of attention back in the day. The husband of this person who was falsely accused of murdering James Maybrick all of a sudden has a connection to Jack the Ripper. Makes no sense. So he dived into it and believes that he found the actual solution, that it wasn't James who wrote the diary. Yes, most people know that that diary was a forgery of some description, but he says it was Michael Maybrick that wrote that diary. And you might think, well, why on earth would he do that? Well, a couple of reasons. Firstly, he hated Florence Maybrick. There was a big age gap between James and Florrie. She was only 18 when they got married. He was almost 40. And their relationship wasn't all that great. But he was addicted to arsenic and was taking arsenic, and then she's on trial because he died of arsenic poisoning, and the justice who was serving on that case was Justice Stephen, the father of another known suspect, James Stephen. But he just was not going to let Florence Maybrick walk away, and he immediately said, she's guilty and I'm going to put her to death. Florence Maybrick, because she was a United States citizen, was spared that. This caused an international event back in those days, and it was later proven that there's no possible way she could have committed the crime. And so not only was the death sentence commuted, but she was exonerated from all the crime, and then she got to live out her years back in the United States. But it's suggested that Michael Maybrick was trying to do two birds, one stone here. For whatever reason, he wanted to frame his brother for being Jack the Ripper so that he could get away with it, and in the process of doing so, stitch up James's wife so that she too would be out of the picture. But we have to ask, why? Was Michael Maybrick a Freemason himself? Well, apparently, yes, he was, though there are absolutely no records of either James or Michael ever being part of the Freemason movement at all. But there could be very good reasons for that, because apparently he wasn't necessarily fond of Freemasons, even though he was one himself. And so this was almost a bit of a shot against them as well, by putting up all this imagery and suggesting that the Freemasons could be involved. That would put the hierarchy into a bit of a tailspin, and they therefore had to try and cover it up. But you would say, well, if they knew that this bloke was doing it, why would they not just go out and arrest him and say he's just a nutter who's not really representing us at all? Well, because there's a code apparently in Freemasonry that says they would not give up a fellow Mason even if it was murder or treason. So no, they couldn't arrest him according to their code. And it's pointed out that even though Michael Maybrick was travelling around a lot with his show, he would have had a base that he could have gone back to in the Whitechapel area during the crimes as they were taking place. But that's why there was different spacing between the events, because him travelling backwards and forwards, he wasn't in town all the time. And that's why there was these delays when the different crimes occurred. But for this to be true, and this theory to be accepted, we would have to consider the fact that there was a giant cover-up taking place at the high level. And some people say, yes, that's definitely what happened. And they point to the fact that the investigation into the crimes was absolutely woeful. On this channel, we've covered many of the crime scenes themselves, and when we really deep dive into who said what and what they actually did, many of the police didn't even follow their own operating procedures. They didn't either blow their whistle, or they didn't take names down correctly, didn't get proper statements. We think of Elizabeth Stride in Dupfield Yard and the greengrocer Packer, who said he sold grapes to a bloke and a woman who was Elizabeth Stride, and the police didn't even bring him into the inquest. When the Mary Kelly crime happened, the police are standing outside for hours, literally hours, waiting for some bloodhounds to turn up, which never showed. And that put them behind in the investigation there. Bodies were taken to wrong morgues. And it wasn't just the Jack the Ripper crimes as stated. The Thames torso crimes were happening in parallel. And yet there was a massive disconnection. No one really, at least from the higher up in the police, wanted to say, well, maybe all these crimes are being committed by the same person. So we either see this as a huge conspiracy cover-up, or were the police being totally incompetent? Well, it really has to be one or the other. Now, I just do want to make a point here very quickly. I am not saying that the police were totally incompetent. Yeah, mistakes were made, but mistakes get made in crimes even today. And yet, back then, they had so much going on. There were all these events happening. The police were dealing with gangs. They were dealing with the Workmen's Club from Dupfield's Yard and organisations like that who were causing problems. They weren't just solely focused on these crimes, which is absolutely frightening when you think about it, but there was heaps happening in the area. But what do you think? Do you think Michael Maybrick and this Freemason conspiracy carries any weight? Well, before you dive in and start commenting, there was just one more event that I haven't mentioned yet. And this one is a little bit chilling. It did happen around the time of that Autumn of Terror. And this event has been mentioned to me a few times in comments, and I've never covered it yet here on this channel. But there was a young boy, 7 years old, Johnny Gill. And in December 1888, he was found brutally murdered, and his body was chopped up. Now, there was a milkman by the name of William Barrett, and he had befriended this young kid and used to let him ride on his cart as he was going about his work. He almost got lynched and almost put on trial for this crime because his wife had told the police, "Oh, my husband just bought a new knife recently." He wasn't end up being charged. He was shown to be totally innocent. But that crime, as well as all these other ones during this Autumn of Terror, remain unsolved. There's two disturbing things, though, about this, not just the viciousness of the crime itself. It said that the body parts were placed in a Freemason imagery, like any Mason would have recognized the way the body was placed. And also, a letter had been received not long before this, purporting to be Jack the Ripper, saying he was going to attack a child next. And therefore it is suggested that this was also the work of Michael Maybrick. And the story of Johnny Gill and what happened to him is something that often gets missed during all these other crimes. But someone did that, and they have never been brought to justice. And the name of Johnny Gill barely ever gets mentioned. But what do you think of this one? Now, I know it is a bit of a stretch, and I'm not one for conspiracy theories in themselves, but I can see how that writer made these connections. Do I agree with it? Not fully, though I do think it helps paint an interesting picture as well. That writing on the wall and why Sir Charles Warren wanted it removed. Now that is an actual interesting connection, and could that be true? Do you have more information on that? I'd be very interested to see what you have to say. But for me, Michael Maybrick is not in my top 5. And I probably need to revisit that top 5 because I started talking about the top 5 at the start of this series and everyone was in it because I only had 5 videos out. But I should go back through and actually list what I really think on each victim as well, because I'm still not sure if the same perpetrator did all of the crimes. But as always, your viewing is very, very much appreciated. So if you've got the means and motivation, give us a like and give us a subscribe, and I think all those things are still free to my knowledge, so yeah, let's do that. I'm Owen, you've been watching the Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one.